I am always so thrilled when I get to hear the personal stories of providers I admire. And hearing tongue-tie expert Lisa Paladino's personal breastfeeding stories gives us an understanding of the cultural changes that happen in her part of the country over the period of a decade and which she helped create. Hearing her stories also gives us hope that more professionals that are creating breastfeeding barriers can be open to changing their minds, just like she did. What are the ways that you have seen your own providers either grow and change as you have presented them with evidence-based information in regards to your own care or that of your baby? Or what are the ways that they have remained rigid? Think about these questions as you listen to this powerful story. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers, so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are.
My name is Lisa Paladino. I'm a certified nurse midwife, an RN, and an IBCLC. I live in Staten Island, New York, where I'm in private practice for the last 7 years and change. And before that, I worked for a very large hospital system doing all kinds of things. Started as a nurse, worked myself up as a midwife, became a lactation consultant at the same time. Started and ran the breastfeeding initiative for many years, trying to become baby friendly, knocking my head against the wall. Decided to give it up, save my life because it was literally killing me to work that hard with not good results and not such a happy place. I specialize in tongue tie. I have 3 children that were born from my body, but I raised 7 children altogether because my sister
Wow.
passed away early and left me with four gifts, as I like to say. And now they're all grown up, and my oldest is 31. They range from 31 to 20, 7 kids in there, and happily married forever, 35 years to my college sweetheart, and we live here very happily. So my life is a
Wow.
lot different right now than so many of your listeners, and yourself included, who have little ones running around, right? But I do have a grandson who was born in January, and
Oh, amazing. I ask all of my guests what their exposure to breastfeeding was before having a baby to highlight an important structural barrier: lack of exposure. And for Lisa, her answer to this question highlighted another systemic failure, which was that she had very little exposure, even though she was a nurse working on a labor and delivery floor before she had a baby. Let that sink in. We expect these nurses to help us, but they have so little education on this topic themselves, and they don't even know what they don't know.
so you would think, as an RN, at the time I was an RN when I first became a mom, that I would have learned about breastfeeding. But one
No.
of my mantras is we do not learn about this in school, right? We
Right.
don't learn
Yeah.
about breastfeeding. We don't learn about tongue tie. We learn that it's important. We learn simple, really, like, maybe a half hour's worth of knowledge about breastfeeding. My mother did not breastfeed. My grandmother breastfed one of her 4 kids, but only for a little bit, and made it like it wasn't something that she should do. And this is interesting because this was back in the 40s, my grandmother, and she was an immigrant. She was from Syria, and she was led to believe that American women gave their babies formula, and that was the right way to feed their babies, and that she was just being like a, like somebody to look down upon as an immigrant who wanted to breastfeed her babies because her mother had breastfed her and her siblings. But that was erased from her I don't know, from a cultural aspect of what was the right thing to do, which is really sad. That and also her language. Like we did not
Mm.
learn Arabic because they were ashamed of it, which is so sad. Like I wish I could go
Right.
back and say, Grandma, please keep what you
Mhm.
knew, So I was the first one to have a baby. My friends all bottle fed. I had two nurse friends that I worked with who were breastfeeders and talked to me about breastfeeding. But other than that, I knew nobody and I knew nothing. I had never seen anybody breastfeed except for the women that breastfed that I took care of in the hospital. And
Mm.
they were looking for
And
me to help them. And
yeah.
I knew
And what type
nothing.
of unit did you work in the hospital?
I worked in postpartum nursery, well, baby
Mm-hmm.
nursery, and then labor and delivery. I was working in labor and delivery when I had my first son. So yeah,
Okay.
and I had no experience. I was helping people breastfeed and I had no idea what to do.
Mm.
It was really
Yeah.
kind of sad when I look back on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then he's
Yeah.
born and we had some interesting in 1991 there were some interesting things going on in the newborn nursery. We had bottles that had formula, but we had bottles that had sterile water and we had bottles that had glucose water. And there was no rhyme or reason as to what you gave when. So it was, you know what, this feeding, I'll nurse him. You know what, this feeding, oh, there's somebody here, I'll give him formula. Oh, I gave him formula last time. This time I'll give him glucose water. I don't know how he survived. I really don't, but he thrived. But I had no idea what I was doing with nursing. He liked to nurse. I had no pain. But I don't even really think that my milk actually came in fully because I was doing this combination from the beginning. And there came a point where I started to get nervous about having to go back to work. And I was thinking that I would have to start giving more bottles. I never had a pump. I never pumped. Nobody told me that that was important for him anyway. And so I started giving him formula in the bottle more often than I was feeding him. And one day he didn't want the bottle. He just wanted to nurse. And you know that feeling of a baby that like they just start nuzzling and they're like he did not want the bottle out of the blue. He must have been about 2 months old. So instead of thinking, wow, this is great, he just wants to nurse, I should make more breast milk for him, I decided to cut him off. I was like,
Oh,
well, how am I going
wow.
to go back to work if he won't take a bottle? I have to stop breastfeeding because he needs to be able to take a bottle.
Mm.
I had no one to ask, no one to
Mm-hmm.
guide me,
Mm.
and that's what I did. And I didn't know there was anything wrong with it.
You
In
know,
my opinion, in my time, like at that point, I was like, yeah, I breastfed my son. Like I went back to work saying, yes, I breastfed him. But when I look back, I call it token breastfeeding,
mm-hmm.
right? Which now I never want anybody to feel badly, right? So you know better, you do better. I say that all the time. But somebody listening to me might say, well, you did a good job. You did, yeah, I know that. I don't want anybody who had the same experience as me who feels differently about it to feel badly about what I'm saying. Right. You know what I mean? Like there's no judgment here. This was my experience and knowing what I know now, I want to, again, another reason to bang my head against the wall. Like, wow, he could have been such a great nurser. He had no pain. He's got no tongue tie. He's got the best mouth of
Mm-hmm.
any of my kids. He could have been such a great nurser if I knew what to do.
After hearing a little bit about how nursing started, I wanted to know what impact the birth might have had on the beginning of her breastfeeding relationship with her son. Lisa described the birth of her son as being traumatic. She is 4'11", and as a labor and delivery nurse who was friends with her providers who decided she should be induced 2 days past her due date, her son was over 7 pounds and had a nuchal cord. His APGAR score was a 7 and he was rushed to the NICU. As you listen to what happened next, think about the impact of the birth of your children on your feeding experiences. This story happened over 30 years ago, yet this exact story is still told daily. And these interventions have long lasting impacts on our ability to feed our babies. What will it take to remove the barrier of stressful births and immediate separations from our babies from the equation so that feeding can get off to the best start possible?
And then when I was recovered, they wheeled me in with a wheelchair, and I literally sat in the middle of a NICU, empty NICU nursery, and nursed
Mm-hmm.
him for the first time because I was like, no, I want to know. Like,
Okay.
that instinct was there, you know.
Okay.
Like, I want to be
So
with my baby. I want to nurse my baby.
there was a bit of delay, between delivery and
Yes.
nursing.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem to impact his ability to suckle.
No.
And
And it was only like probably an hour or two. It wasn't.
okay.
It wasn't a
Okay.
long time. Yeah.
Was there anyone there who was offering lactation support? I know that when you work at the hospital, there can be this, you can sometimes often get less support because there's this idea that, oh, she knows what she's doing. She doesn't
Hmm.
need the support, or I'm not going to interfere. And so sometimes you can get more privileges when you work within the hospital system,
Yeah.
but also there can be this feeling of like, oh, we're not going to send the support. So was support available to
There was no
patients?
support available. There was
Okay.
nothing. My role became um, breastfeeding initiative coordinator, lactation consultant in 2008. That was the first time
Oh,
there was someone who was a lactation consultant at the hospital. There was
wow.
before me, there was a staff educator who was an IBCLC, but she was just hired to educate the staff. She was like in professional development. She was not on the floor unless she voluntarily decided to make visits, which was
Mm.
crazy. But so no, I got no help, no support. It actually, for those who are working in the hospital, I don't know if it's different since COVID, but what happened with me was I got so many visitors. Everybody wanted to come in to see me. And that was part of the reason why I was giving bottles, because I was like, I wasn't going to undress and start nursing this baby in front of, the housekeeper that I work with, or the whatever, the clerk and the administrators came, like everybody came to visit me, well wishing. It was wonderful that I had a lot of friends. But it was, I had one friend that I had barely seen. I had worked with her a year before she came, and she sat in my room all evening, and I was like, what are you doing here? I just wanted to be alone. I want to recover. I want to spend time with my new son and my husband. So that kind of stuff can also happen when you work at the hospital. You get too much attention, you know, and it takes away
Yes.
from that rest and recover time.
And that's an interesting fact. People have a hard enough time newly breastfeeding in front of family.
Yes.
But I know I was a pretty confident breastfeeder and just made a choice. I'm just going to breastfeed in front of people. Um, but I do know there were instances where I had to be around coworkers breastfeeding. And it was I felt like I was crossing a boundary
Mhm.
a little bit. If
Yeah.
I was bringing the baby to work for whatever reason, it was just a little harder to cross that boundary.
Well,
And so I can
yeah.
imagine being around coworkers
Yeah.
coming into
And
your
in
room.
1991, there was no breastfeeding in public,
Right.
right? I mean,
Right.
this is 1991, you know.
Right.
If I was in my living room and my father-in-law was there, he'd be like, "What do you do? What is she doing?" And I was in my own living room, covered
Right.
up trying to nurse my son. What is she doing? Or, I have to take him now, he has to eat. Oh, I wanted to hold him more. I got that kind of pressure from my family. Like, he
Mhm.
should be ours, not it's important for you to feed him kind of. Can't you just give him a bottle
Mhm.
so we can hold him longer? Like, that's the
Right.
kind of
Or can
things that
I
I.
give him the bottle?
Right,
Right.
right, right. Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, yeah, I had all of that, but um, I I think that if I had more, I don't know, experiential support, knowing, having, if I had witnessed any other woman breastfeed, I think that I would have felt stronger in my convictions to prioritize feeding him at the breast.
Mhm.
And I didn't have that. And I,
Mhm.
looking back, I didn't even realize that I didn't know what I was missing. I didn't know what I didn't know. I thought I was doing great.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
then I learned a lot between that point. My um, daughter was born 3 years later, and just my knowledge base was evolving from working in labor and delivery and not feeling, we could have a whole other conversation about birth culture and all that.
Yes.
Lisa said her second labor was quite different from the first, but she still wanted to please her friends on the labor and delivery floor, and she wanted to have a delivery that was convenient for her husband's schedule, who did not get paid parental leave. She took castor oil on a Friday night, and by the time her husband was home from work, they went straight to the hospital. She got an epidural at her doctor's suggestion so he could break her water, and her baby was born 4 hours later. This is what happened next.
So now she's born, whole different experience. It wasn't a hard pushing experience. She comes skin to skin. I nursed her. She was a peanut. She was only 6'2". And they told me that I her they took I did some skin to skin. I didn't know what it was at that point, but I did hold her for a while. And then, we passed her around the room as we used to do. Everybody held her too. By the time she got up to the nursery, her temperature was low, and they
Mm.
wouldn't let me have her out of the
Mm.
nursery. They wouldn't let me nurse her because her temperature was low. And I said, well, I'll hold her and that'll stabilize her temperature. I knew that much at that point, right? This is 1994 now. These were my friends. These were people that I worked with forever. And they did not trust me to keep my baby warm.
Mm.
And I was sad and frustrated, and I didn't know what to do to get my baby back. Finally, the shift changes, the day shift comes in, and I'm like, listen, put a hat on her, wrap her up. I need to nurse my baby. This is crazy. And they let me do that. And then I went home that day. And,
Mm.
um, but of course, best laid plans. I had an injury at the hospital because when you are an employee of the hospital, you're more prone to things happening to you. While I was having my epidural, after the birth, I was shivering like you normally shiver after birth, and sometimes after a delivery, you get the shakes. And there was this well meaning nurse who decided to wrap up a heated saline bottle from the heater. We used to have this heater, which is probably still there, that kept the fluids hot for the
Yes.
C-sections.
Mm-hmm.
She wrapped it up, put it in a baby blanket, and put it against my hip. And because I was numb, I didn't realize that when I moved, it shifted and I wound up with a third-degree burn on my hip, which I still have a
Oh
scar.
no.
So my now I have a toddler, a newborn, trying to nurse. It's going pretty well, but I have a third-degree burn on my hip. So I couldn't even sit comfortably. Again, nobody helping me with breastfeeding because nobody knew how to support me with breastfeeding. And I had to get it debrided. I was taking, and at that time I thought it wasn't safe to take any medicine and breastfeed. I had to take Motrin for the pain, and I had to take it, more often than I would have liked to nurse. So I wasn't nursing as often, and I started giving her formula, and she was killing my nipples. Such
Mm.
pain with her latch, and she's this is the one that just made me a grandma. She's 27 years old. She still has a tongue tie.
Mm.
She had a tongue tie. I didn't know about it at the time, but all of the symptoms were there. And I went to the pediatrician. The pediatrician told me that I was starving her. And when I look back, she only lost 6%. And she told
Mm-hmm.
me I was starving her. She said to me, why are you doing this to yourself? Just give her formula. That was the support I got. So gave her formula, cold turkey at 3 weeks. I wrapped my breast, put on ice, and weaned her. I was like, I can't do this anymore. There's no reason to do it. I was probably a little postpartum depression or PTSD going on at the same time because I had this pain, I had this thing I had to deal with. I was trying to work things out with the hospital because they were nervous because I had an injury. There was a lot of things going on. So I just stopped. I just stopped.
Mm.
And if I could go back, because she's only an N of one, but she has such a poor immune system. She catches everything that goes by. She had to have her tonsils out when she was 6. She has a milk protein allergy. She's also got an allergy to yeast. She's very sensitive. She cannot, if she had the skin issue that we didn't know what it was. And then when we found out it was dietary intolerances, but she couldn't go in the sun for like 5 years.
Mm.
I could not expose her to sunlight. She would just break out all over
Wow.
her body. So yeah, so she has a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff that I know that breast milk and avoiding formula would have been helpful for her, and I feel terrible about it, but you know better, you do better.
You know better, you do better. And you didn't have anybody helping you.
Right.
You didn't have even your medical providers were pushing you to do what
Yeah.
you did.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Not only weren't they supporting me, but like I literally got from my pediatrician, like, why would you even do this? You're putting
Right.
yourself in jail. That's what she told me.
You're putting yourself in jail.
Yeah.
Right.
And you know what? Other than that, I respected everything about her. She was an excellent pediatrician. She knew her stuff. She wasn't an alarmist. She was great with sickness in kids. She was wonderful, but she knew nothing about breastfeeding.
Right.
You know?
And you and I both know as lactation supporters, it's really hard to walk this tightrope act that we have to do when we're working with clients who are working with their pediatricians, because we
Mm-hmm.
don't want to make them distrust their pediatricians, because
Mm-hmm.
pediatricians, they're going to be with their pediatricians for 18 years,
Mm-hmm.
potentially. And
Mm-hmm.
pediatricians, there can be really good pediatricians who just don't know breastfeeding,
Mm-hmm.
because the amount of time that they get in med school for breastfeeding education is about 3 hours.
Right. It's terrible.
Um,
It's
it's terrible.
terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's such a small portion of what their scope is.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so, do we wish that they had more breastfeeding information, because that's how they start their relationship with the
Right.
family?
I
Yes.
just
Does
wish
it?
they knew that they don't know. Like I wish they knew what they didn't
Right.
know. And
Exactly.
it goes beyond breastfeeding. I think it also has to do with the way we raise our kids, baby care in
Yes.
general, right?
Yes.
So they don't learn how to care for a baby. And then they're looked at as these experts on how to take care of your baby. And I like to turn it around and say, as a parent, you're the expert on how to take care of your baby. You need the pediatrician when your baby's sick, when you have a health question, that kind of thing. And, it's really, I go back and forth because a lot of times I say, well, it's not their fault. They didn't learn about this in school. But it is their fault because I didn't learn about this in school either. Right. But I saw the needs of the people I'm taking care of and I kept learning. And same
Right.
with you, right? You didn't learn about
Right.
this in any of your schooling, but you see a need and you learn what you need to know to be able to care for the people that come to you for advice and lactation support.
Right.
I don't think there's really a good excuse. I think that we have to get to a point where we realize that we our instincts matter as moms.
Mm-hmm.
And even if a kid is sick, our instincts matter as moms.
Mm-hmm.
Even if
Yeah.
somebody's not getting the right answer from their pediatrician, they should ask someone else. Keep going
Exactly.
until it
Yeah.
feels right in any
Right.
subject matter.
What I try to do when working with anybody, or even just talking to a friend, is to help them feel like their internal feelings matter. And
Mm-hmm.
anytime your feelings are being dismissed by a care provider, that's not okay.
No.
Even if you do have to come up with another plan, there are
Mm-hmm.
times when somebody needs to switch to formula. And
Mm-hmm.
it might be because of missteps that happened for weeks.
Yeah.
It's never a personal failure. I always say
Right.
it's a systemic failure. But it
Yes.
might be that you are at the point where it is time to make a different choice. But it's never okay for someone to be dismissive of the grief that someone might be feeling or of the efforts that have been made to
Right,
maintain
right,
breastfeeding.
right. So I always like to say that it's not just what you're doing, but it's your experience of what you're doing that matters.
Mm-hmm.
So your experience breastfeeding matters. So, in the case of nipple pain, right? That matters. It matters even if there's people that believe that it's okay for it to hurt, which is a whole other conversation. But what I say, it's not just about how the baby's doing. Oh, it's okay that you're uncomfortable, the baby's gaining weight, you know. And I say, no, your experience, how you feel about how you feed your baby is so important. And that's why I'm sad when I think back from that daughter, my daughter Jess, because I was sad at the time because I knew
Mm,
it didn't feel right, but I didn't know
mm,
what to do. And at the time I
mm-hmm,
sort of just like, yeah, I got through it. Um, I mean, I could go on about the experience of having that wound and it was open. I had to fight to get extra time off from maternity because the wound was open. And
mm,
as I was recovering, I started having more sadness about the breastfeeding not working out, and I felt like a
mm,
failure.
As lactation professionals, we constantly are asked why breastfeeding is so hard today. And I can't always point to one reason, but if I had to, this would be it. When you deliver your baby and expect the people who are helping you to take care of your newborn in the early weeks and months to be knowledgeable about breast milk and milk supply and expect them to have the answers, and they act as if they do, answering your questions as if they know the answers, and breastfeeding goes awry, and those same people and everyone else in your life are dismissive of how emotionally painful it is not to be able to feed your baby as you intended, that is a huge barrier. It sets so many of us up for failure. And those providers, be it nurses in the hospital or pediatricians or family care providers, don't know what they don't know. And they don't refer out to those of us who can help. This is a huge gap in the system. And it makes so many of us feel as if we failed and as if breastfeeding is intrinsically difficult instead of a lost art.
Um, so then I get pregnant again. 8 years go by. In those 8 years,
mm.
I take care of my sister's kids. 4 years. Well, 4 years after Jess was born, I got my sister's kids, part time mostly, but a lot. And so I
And
have the experience. The
how
babies
old
were
were her
6 months
children?
old. They were twins, were 6 months old at the time. Um, and they were preemies. They were born 30
Mm,
weekers. They were preemies, and she passed away when they were 6 weeks old. Sounds like a really sad story. It's a happy ending because they're beautiful kids and everything is good. And I miss my sister every day, but it is, it's a wound that is healed over time.
mm-hmm,
I'm close with all four of them. It's wonderful. Our kids are like siblings. It's been a wonderful, it takes a village kind of experience, that we've
mm-hmm,
had. But so now I have 6-month-old babies, or starting from when they were born, premature. There was no way she was making breast milk. She had terminal cancer at the time. And I didn't realize the importance of it. When I look back, I would have made milk for those babies.
mm,
When I look back, they both have
mm-hmm.
asthma. They're healthy, but they have asthma and allergies and like little things. But other than that, they're healthy. So I have the experience of bottle feeding twins. Right? So, that was an adventure. And twins that, had reflux and asthma and in and out of the hospital and all that. So I have completely bottle fed babies and I have completely breastfed babies because then 4 years after that, I got pregnant again. My older kids were 11 and 8. I get pregnant with my third daughter, who's the baby of the whole tribe. And I decide that by this point, I was already in school. I was working on getting my degree so that I can go back for my midwifery degree. I knew what I wanted to do. I was already like studying lactation. The internet was a thing. I was learning on my own. I had taken many courses already before I went back to school, been to conferences. I had spiritual midwifery. I knew the whole, I was like, and I had friends who were midwives who had started doing births in the hospital, which was monumental where I live, to have these
Mm.
midwives doing births. And we had a birthing room in the hospital with a tub. It was wonderful. But I said to them, guys, I want you to deliver my baby, but I want to do it at home.
Mm.
And I said, there is no way I'm going to have another baby in this hospital and go through what I went through the last time. So my brave friends who had never done a home birth, who were trained only in hospital birth, said, okay, as long as you're okay with, if anything goes wrong, we're going right to the hospital and everybody's got to know. You got to get all the equipment and we have to have nurses there, because they were used to hospital birth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was my two midwife friends, their intern at the time, who is actually now a very established and wonderful midwife. She was on call with them, and three of my best nurse friends from labor and delivery, and my whole family was there. And I had a beautiful home birth. And the interesting thing was, Jill was born with a cleft lip. And
Mm.
if she was born at the hospital with a cleft lip, she would have been whisked off to the NICU.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And she had a cleft lip, but she was perfect. Her palate was
Mm.
perfect. She nursed from birth without any problem with that cleft lip. We had zero separation, and I nursed her for 14 months.
Wow. What a difference
Yeah.
those first two stories
Mm-hmm.
to the third
Yeah.
story in having a supportive setting makes.
Mm-hmm.
It comes up again and again in the milk
Yep.
making minutes.
Yep. I was surrounded
Having
by people who believed I could do it. Even
mm-hmm,
my mom, by the third one, my mom has since passed away, but I love telling this story. We were in the mall. I think my daughter was probably about 3 months old, and we were shopping in the mall. We had all the kids with us, and we stopped to have lunch at the little food court. And the baby started crying, and I'm like, oh no, I think she needs to eat. And my mom, she was so cool. Now this is 2001, right? So
mm-hmm.
we've progressed a little bit. She's like, feed her here. I said, are you sure, Mom? You're okay with that? And she's like, Lisa, your baby is hungry. Feed your baby. She was so cool. And
Oh,
I was so proud of her, because it's like, this is so cool. So yeah. And her whole, my daughter Jill, the one that she's 20 now, her whole the whole birth experience and her breastfeeding for me and all of that, the way she was born was really healing for our whole family because we had been through trauma. It was also post 9/11. I was pregnant with her for 9/11. My brother was
mm,
a New York City firefighter. He was there. He lost many friends. He was
mm.
affected immeasurably. He was at her birth too, and he was a different person after her birth. Everybody was like empowered by me taking birth back, and that's what gave me the push to keep going in my career. I'm like, if I can do this, I can do anything, you know. Yeah. So that's my full circle, turnaround with from what it was in 91 to what it was in 2001. Totally
Yeah.
different story.
I think that story really illustrates how much birth and breastfeeding matter and why we fight so hard to make it
Mhm.
matter.
Yeah.
Because some people think, oh, it's just, maybe 6 months of a baby's life, maybe a year of a baby's life, maybe 2 years of a baby and a mother's life. But what you're talking about is something that empowered you
Mhm.
to heal from past traumas
Mhm.
and to propel forward into the rest of your life with a new power that you had not had before.
Right. And it's intergenerational healing as well, because now Not only did it help my mom, right, come to terms with what it should be, and she was at my birth and she was so excited. And her and my mother-in-law, while I was in labor, they baked a birthday cake, right?
Oh.
So it was so sweet. But anyway, so she was empowered by my power, and so my daughter Jess was 8 years old at the time of the birth, and she was with me. She literally was like holding my legs and rubbing my back and wiping my brow. And she just got pregnant and had a baby. And she had no doubt that she wanted a home birth. She said, Mom, this is how babies are born. Why would I go to the hospital? And because the only birth experience that she knew of in our family was my birth with Jill, and she was there in my bedroom. So she searched out and she got wonderful home birth midwives. And she had an amazing home birth. And she's, 7 months breastfeeding, just starting on some baby led weaning, and he's enjoying food and he's doing amazing. Of course, he's got a whole tongue tie story, and we can talk about that another time. But so proud of her. And knowing that if I hadn't done what I had done for her sister's birth, my daughter's trajectory would be different. And
Mm-hmm.
her son's trajectory would be different.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
like a ripple effect.
Yeah. Every time I feel like what I'm doing is really hard, or as a mother or as a
Mhm.
practitioner, I just remember that it's going to be easier for my children.
Yes. Yes.
And it does make an impact because I
Yes.
don't want them to struggle as much as I've struggled.
Right. Right. And even the fact of the topic of like nursing in public. Nobody was nursing in public when I had my son. Even when I had Jill, when I was confident to kind of nurse in public, it was still a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I nursed her in a lot of places because I had other kids. So I was always out, and people were like, I remember being at a basketball game and I had people going, what is she doing? And someone
Mm,
said, I think she's feeding the baby. Nobody knew this where I lived. It was crazy. But now my daughter nurses everywhere,
right.
and so the ripple effect over generations really does matter. Honestly, she had no problems at all. I never had
Okay.
pain. I never had engorgement, never had any clogged ducts. She
Mm-hmm.
nursed, she grew, she was an efficient nurser. At 3 months old, she had to have surgery to repair it, which was
Okay.
hard. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but by then, I was like a really brave mama. Like, I changed from my younger days, and I was like, this kid is, I'm going to nurse her as soon as she comes out of surgery. And because she couldn't nurse right before surgery. And then the I think the dentist that did the surgery, that he, I think he was a little afraid of me because I was like, "This is what I'm doing, okay?" And he's like, "Okay." So, but she comes out. It was sad to leave her for surgery, but then I met her in the recovery room, and she was screaming. So I
Oh.
grabbed her off the bed and I latched her. I sat on the bed and I latched her, and all of the nurses and techs, they were all trying to like get her vitals and stuff like that. And I was like, wait. And I latched
Mm-hmm.
her, and she stopped crying and she started nursing, and they were like, you can't do that. Like, try and stop me, because
Mm-hmm.
if she's nursing, she's going to be quiet, and now you can take her vital signs, and I'm not putting
Right.
it down.
Right.
We were supposed to stay overnight, and they discharged us that night. They were like, get them out of here. you know
Right. Yeah.
Because I'm like, I'm not putting my baby down. She needs me. And she healed
Right.
so beautifully. It was wonderful. It was a wonderful
So
experience. My doctor really trusted me because he was like, I wouldn't normally let somebody go home. I said, I know, but the nurses want me to leave, right? Because they can't do anything for us. It was
mm-hmm.
kind of funny. But yeah, she
So
healed.
she didn't have any pain from the surgery that made nursing difficult for
She
her?
might have had, I gave her a couple of doses of Tylenol. Um, and then after that, it was fine. She nursed perfectly.
Wow.
Really, I mean, I couldn't have had a better experience than I did with her nurse.
Wow. Wow.
My only sad part about that was she was so busy and so interested in becoming like the older kids that she had no patience for nursing. So like 14 months, she was done. I was like,
Wow.
I want to keep
Uh-huh.
going.
Hey listeners, it's Lo popping in with a quick request again. I have big plans for the Milk Making Minutes, and that includes bringing on some really interesting guests to tell their baby feeding stories. But I need you to rate and review the show on your favorite listening app so that those guests know that they will reach a wide audience if they do that. And in your review, I would love you to tell me who you would like to hear from. Is there somebody who you would like me to bring on to the Milk Making Minutes? You can do that in your review, or you can join my Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook and let me know who you would like to hear from. Thanks so much.
I hear this story again and again that mothers come to their voice through breastfeeding. They
Yes.
come to find their voice and their ability to take control and take charge of their children's life through breastfeeding.
Yep.
And I also hear the opposite, that when control gets taken away from them, I hear it often if they have a baby who's in the NICU for any
Mm-hmm.
amount of time, and suddenly there's somebody telling them what their baby's schedule is, when
Yeah.
they can touch their baby, when they can hold their baby, that then once the baby is released to them, it's very hard to then start making decisions for the baby.
Yes. I have seen
And
that, and I've seen that in patients that come to me. And I've also kind of been on that end of it. When we had my sister had the babies and they were 30 weekers. And in 1998, a 30 weeker was more preterm than it is now, right? It was a big
yes.
deal. But
Mm-hmm.
they were miracle babies. They did so well. But so well that at 4 weeks old, they were like, guess what? Alex can come home tomorrow. And we were like, what? We're not ready for him. And then
Yeah.
they just kind of like, okay, here's your baby, go. And now you're like, wait, but you've been doing all this stuff to my baby. And now I just have to take him home and do what? They're like, just treat him like a normal baby. Like, but he's not a normal baby. Like it was mind blowing. So I do empathize with those moms who have been in that place. It's a scary thing.
Yeah. I just think it's a good reminder both to practitioners, like give the families as much power as you can and as much decision making autonomy as you can,
Mhm.
and to the families, if you're feeling out of control, um that can bleed over into toddlerhood, into
Mhm.
the preschool years, into the school years, where you feel like you're constantly giving your power away with your children. And
Mhm.
that's why these breastfeeding conversations are so important. And it's
Mhm.
why we talk about it so much, because
Yeah.
it's not just the months that your baby is breastfeeding.
No.
It,
And
it bleeds
to
over.
slide it back and go back to birth, the way
Oh,
you birth.
yes.
And
Yes.
so many women take back their experience like I did, not with the first one, sometimes with the second one, sometimes not with the
Mm-hmm.
second one. Sometimes it takes
Mm-hmm.
more because you
Mm-hmm.
just keep learning and getting stronger and realizing that you've got nothing to lose. You're in charge of yourself, but it's very hard. Especially I was young. I was a baby. I was a baby having a baby the first time. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know, and I thought I knew because I was a nurse, which is
Right.
crazy because I knew nothing, and I
Yeah.
was a nurse.
Yeah. So then let me ask you, because so many people just stay on the L&D floor, they might work there for many years, they might make some small changes to how they do patient care when it comes to breastfeeding and even labor and delivery practices. But what do you think ignited the fire in you to change so drastically, to how you were practicing previously, to then becoming a CNM, to becoming an IBCLC, and now to having your private practice and being a tongue tie expert?
So I believe that it was the influence of there were one or two nurses that I worked with. Let me see. I'll say there were three nurses I worked with who were thinking outside the box, who taught me to support women who were doing things naturally, and who dragged me to conferences with them.
Mm.
And then there were this group of nurses. There were two of them from the hospital that started out going back to school and becoming midwives and coming back to our hospital after having worked as a nurse there, coming back and saying, we want to start Staten Island Midwifery Associates. We want to have a midwifery based business here. And they did. And they
Mm.
hired nurses from the hospital to work in their office. They had health fairs where they taught about natural birth. There, I learned from their patients, from taking care of their patients. It like lit a fire in me.
Yeah,
And
it's
it,
amazing the
yeah,
impact that a couple of people can make,
yes,
positively
yes,
or negatively. Yeah.
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 So,
So so then now you have your own private practice and you serve all types of people, but you
yeah,
specialize in tongue tie. How did that passion
yeah.
grow in you for helping people with tongue tie?
So I worked in an outpatient clinic. I became an IBCLC. And in 1 week, I had 3 patients that I could not help. Like I tried everything. I tried
Mm.
different holds. I tried whatever. Could not get what I knew. I couldn't get 3 different babies to latch. And one
Mm.
of the moms said to me, "Somebody said that maybe my baby has a tongue tie," and I dismissed her. Just like
Mm.
so many providers do now, I just dismissed her because I didn't know about tongue tie. I only knew what I learned in school about anterior tongue tie. And I dismissed her. I felt like crap, honestly, because I go home and I'm like, this isn't right. This week sucked. I might as well just stop what I'm doing because I can't help people anymore. And
Mm.
thank goodness the internet was a thing already. And I like, let me look at this tongue tie thing. Maybe it is something. But in my midwife's brain, I was thinking non-intervention, right? As a midwife, I don't want to do anything that's not necessary. And I was thinking, why would we have babies born who needed a procedure in order to breastfeed? That didn't make any sense to me. And it really doesn't make sense if you think about it that way. Babies should be able to breastfeed. So I opened my mind. I did some research. I found an association at the time. It was called IATP, which is the International Association of Tongue Tie Professionals. I started digging into all the stuff they had online. I think they had some online courses, and then I went to a conference. And I walked into the conference, and I called my husband after the first session, and I said, "Honey, I've met my people." It was people
Mm.
from all over the world that were having the same kind of experiences that I was having, not being able to help certain babies, and they didn't know why. And then
Mm.
starting to look into tongue tie and coming together with those who one step ahead of us. And we started learning from each other. And then I came home from the conference and I spoke to someone else who was there and who was much more experienced than me, but wasn't in my area. And I said, like, how can I help? I don't really know enough yet. And they said, but you know more than anybody else in your area,
Mhm.
right? We need you to do this. We need someone where you live to do this. So, put on your big girl pants and start practicing telling people that you take care of tongue tie. And all it took was me having one successful family for it to start snowballing. So this was
Mhm.
going back, I don't know, 10 years ago. And now I have my own courses. I have a podcast all about it where, I call what I do tongue tie experts, not because I think I'm an expert, because I think everyone's an expert who has dealt with tongue tie, whether they be a parent or a provider, a professional, a doctor, a nurse, whoever it is. If they've dealt with this issue and they know about it, they're the experts. So I bring the experts together and we talk about it
Mhm.
and we learn from each other.
Mhm.
So that's how I've gotten where I am. And I've honed my protocols over the years. Things change. I keep learning and growing and evolving. What I would have told a family 5 years ago is different than what I tell them now. And probably a year from now will be different. because you know better, you do better, and there's more research coming out, and just keep going. And I love what I do because I impact so many lives by what I do, and I can make so many connections. Like a lot of times I feel like I'm just a director. Like, you don't need me, but you need this one, and then you need this one, and then come back to me. That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so your podcast is called the Tongue Tie Experts Podcast.
Yes, it is. Yep. Pretty obvious,
And
right?
so, yes, and people can find that wherever they listen to podcasts.
Yes. And, for everybody who's listening, you got to know that Lo is on my podcast. Look for that episode.
Yeah, I told my story, my personal story of breastfeeding, which I have not told on this podcast.
And we had a great conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And you both interview, you kind of do a mix. You interview other experts in the field, all those people that you just mentioned. So it could be another IBCLC, or it could be a craniosacral therapist, or it could be a dentist. You interview so many people whose experience intersects with tongue tie.
Yes. And
but then
families.
Yes. And then you also talk to parents, because what they're saying about their experiences, what we parents who have experienced tongue tie, even you are a parent who experienced tongue tie, you just never had it resolved. What we say about what's happening with us and with our babies matters.
Absolutely.
It really is.
To hear the stories, because until you hear the stories, you may not be affected by it. And I feel it's important for families who are going through struggles right now to hear their stories and other people's stories, because I hear the same stories over and over and over. Different people, different details, but basically the same underlying thread in the story.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for sharing both your personal stories and then how that led you into your professional expertise. And I just want to thank you for also being a person who was willing to grow and change.
Oh, thank you.
Because it's made an impact on the breastfeeding community, and so many people just stay stagnant. And we need many more people seeing what's wrong and then deciding to learn and change themselves personally so that they can impact the birth and breastfeeding culture. So I appreciate you being someone who is willing to do that.
Thank you. I appreciate your appreciation. And I get more than I receive, more than I give from this work. It's beautiful.
It's amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Good.
I'm so thankful to Lisa Paladino for sharing this powerful story to us that illustrates that people can and do change. Not only did she open her own mind enough to change over the years and grow as a professional, but in 1991, she did not know anyone who was breastfeeding in public. Then there's the beautiful story she shares of her own mother telling her to feed her hungry baby in the mall in 2001. And now her own daughter breastfeeds her grandbaby anywhere and everywhere. And when she first heard the term tongue tie, she dismissed it. And now she teaches parents and practitioners how to improve breastfeeding for babies by understanding all about tethered oral ties in her courses online and in her huge Facebook group that provides information and resources for people interested in the topic. If you are interested in these topics, please visit her website linked in the show notes to learn more. I'm so thankful to Lisa for sharing these deeply personal stories. If you would like to discuss the barriers that keep us from feeding our babies with ease, please join my Milk Making Minutes community group. We need your voice. I'll see you there.